Hello, British literature. This is Mr. Taylor. This presentation will be about avoiding inadvertent plagiarism. So, we're going to begin with a little bit of background here with plagiarism, just understanding that the way that you plagiarize is by taking materials that are not your ideas and not giving credit to those people who actually came up with those ideas, who actually wrote the original concepts. Now, this can happen in a variety of ways. Sometimes plagiarism can be by accident, and sometimes it's deliberate. There are some ways that you can check your paper to make sure that you're not making those mistakes. This will, in a lot of ways, really save you points. It's not necessarily about figuring out whether you're passing or failing the paper, but a lot of the mistakes made with inadvertent plagiarism are actually style mistakes, things in MLA where people don't follow the rules of that and end up plagiarizing. So let's take a look at a few of those ways that you can stop or prevent plagiarism. So, first, review notes carefully and include citations. As you're writing your paper, it's really important. You can use Noodle tools to help you do this. But what's really important here is that you've separated number one and number two. And that means separating your ideas from the ideas of those authors and those critics. If that's very, very clear in your paper, then you're in good shape. However, if that is muddled, if it is confused, if I can't tell when you are writing an idea and when a critic is writing an idea, that is definitely a problem. And that is one of the ways that you'll start to lose points on organization. You'll start to lose points really across the board because your argument will be weakened. It will be confusing. You won't be actually defending the thesis. You'll be rambling on about something that's not the thesis, and that's why plagiarism is often a part or a component of a bad paper and why we want to avoid it. Number three there says, quote exactly. And really, this is, like the other two, this is, I'll say this idea of like a red flag, but when you have something that's in quotes, and we'll see these quotations in your paper, and then you've got typos in them. You've got words that don't make sense. Even the sources that you're using, your teachers are familiar with those sources. They've used them for years and years. They know other students have used them. And if you're misquoting them, that's a problem. It is a red flag. And the more red flags you have, the way more likely you are not only to lose points, but you're going to find one of these is going to lead you to plagiarism. And so you want to avoid that. Double check your quotes. Ignorance or confusion or ignorance is not an excuse. At this level, at an honors level course for English in the 11th grade, you can't just say you didn't know. This is the same in next year and in college. You really can't feign ignorance. You need to understand now that if you are going to use other people's ideas, you need to credit them. It is that simple. If you say, I got confused or I didn't know, you're basically saying, I don't belong here. I shouldn't be in this course. I don't know how to write a research paper without cheating on it. And that is why the expectation level is higher, that you are protecting yourself against plagiarism, that you're not committing some of the basic mistakes we're going to see in just a few minutes. Because if you're making these basic mistakes, you really aren't prepared for the type of writing that's expected of you. The last area here is have access to copies of cited materials. This is kind of a small point, but it's a good one to understand. Anytime you do research, the expectation is that if you have sources you've used, you can produce those sources and you can make them available. This is at the collegiate level. It's at the high school level too. So it won't affect you so much for this paper, but I want you to understand that anytime someone says to you, hey, can I see the sources for your paper? If a teacher or a professor says that, you should respond with, yes, I'll get them to you as soon as I can. It could be a little anxiety inducing, to have someone say, I need to see your sources or I want to see your sources, but it could be something innocuous. It could be really nothing at all. So just understand that is part of a part of the research process where being able to produce those sources. You don't want to have something you cited and not be able to find it. The other side of that is we're talking about plagiarism, but there are other styles of academic dishonesty where people make up sources, they manipulate sources, they lie about sources, and that is a big deal also. That is this, it'll get you in the same kind of trouble that deliberate plagiarism will get you into, which will be failing the paper. And again, this paper for Brit Lit is a required component of the course. So, how do we avoid plagiarizing? Well, when you're using a source, you generally use it in three different ways. You quote material from it, you'll paraphrase something from it, or you'll summarize something from the original source. So we'll look at all three, and we'll look at the tendencies of plagiarism in each of those. So the first thing here is be careful not to overquote, quote one source too many times, or use a quote that is too long. They all look like padding, and they don't demonstrate critical thought. So this is just really the whole idea of you have this one thing, this one idea, and you are using it as a crutch, and you end up writing a book report. You end up writing a summary of one source rather than an actual research paper, because a research paper should be pulling from this source and this source and this source and this source, combining those ideas, synthesizing them, and defending your argument. If it's not doing that, then it's not really a research paper. It might be something else, but it's not a research paper. Let's take a look at an example, and I'm going to exit out of this for just a second. And we're going to look here at an overused source. So I did use Frankenstein as the example for this. For this, I'm not necessarily going to read you every single word of it, but you see I have about a page long here. Okay, everything in this page is from Don Nardo, and you're going to see these quotes. All right, some of you maybe even used this source, but if you look at the way this is structured, what we have here is a short introduction, and then Nardo explains that alienation of the creature started at his creation. We've got a quote from Nardo. And then we go on. The creature was basically an infant when it was created, yet Frankenstein didn't care for the child. This is just summary. And then we've got another quote from Nardo following right here, and that's from here down to here. Again, cited correctly. So this is inadvertent because the person's trying to give credit, but they're doing a pretty bad job of really synthesizing ideas. And again, here's another Nardo quote. And then on top of that, we've got a fourth one, but it's a long quote. So it eats up about a third of the page. That's very weak writing. Okay. And that is going to be reflected on your final content score on those areas where you're trying to make the argument and show you're supporting your thesis. And all you really did here was really use one source for an entire page and summarize it. So please avoid doing that. We'll jump back here to the presentation, and we'll talk about number 2 with quotes, which is don't take a quote out of context or admit words important to the meaning because it's convenient for your argument. And what this really means is an example of this might be is where you have an author making a claim and then giving you, perhaps laying out what others, the counterclaims against them, but instead you use that instead of what the author's actual intention is, and you end up kind of manipulating the source in order to fit your thesis. So let's take a look at one of those. Jump down here, and here we have a quote from, this is from an article by Colleen Bentley, Family, Humanity, Polity, Theorizing the Basis and Boundaries of Political Community in Frankenstein. It's from the Criticism Journal. So what we have, here's the original quote, and then here's a misuse of the quote. So that Shelley politicizes the family has not gone unnoticed by literary critics who interpret the novel as a more or less successful critique of patriarchal power in both civic and conjugal domains. However, I'm proposing that through her treatment of human and family associations, Shelley brings forward an altogether different cluster of issues around justice and civic membership than has previously been realized in the scholarly literature of her novel. Okay, so how would someone perhaps misuse this quote? In this case, what they do is they take this part where she is describing what other critics do and instead make that sound like that is what Bentley is claiming. So, Shelley is able to successfully demonstrate the importance of a woman's role in home and life throughout Frankenstein, and Bentley points out that the book is a critique of patriarchal power in both civic and conjugal domains. It again, that was not her intention. Her intention is to say, I'm going to argue the opposite of that or something different from that. And she was simply summarizing other critics' points of view. Now, could you reword this to make this quote work? Probably. But at the same time, you do have to be very careful of keeping the original author's intent. If someone were to catch this and call you out on it, you would be in the wrong. So please keep that in mind as you move forward. And again, I think that is something that would cost you points. Wouldn't be a grade failure, but we're looking at mistakes that borderline on that idea of plagiarism or academic dishonesty. Let's take a look at some paraphrasing and summary. So a paraphrase and a summary, the difference is a paraphrase is about as long as the original, just done in your words. A summary is a much shorter version done in your own wording that so maybe it's a whole chapter of a book, maybe it's half of a book, or a claim or an idea associated with Frankenstein. Maybe you've got 4 pages of really interesting argument, but you really want to put them down into a sentence or two, and that's the summary. So you want to make sure that you're using your own words and vocabulary. You want to try to vary sentence structure. The structure, the way the sentences sound, and the cadence of the sentences should not sound like what your original source was if you are doing a good job paraphrasing or summarizing. It's a great idea to mix up your order of ideas in order to not have the same order of ideas as the original. Finally, one thing you can do to really protect yourself is to provide the citation and mark the boundaries. And that mark the boundaries is really a way to protect, really make sure that it's clear that you're trying to give credit to every part of what the author said. All mark the boundaries means is you have a clear signal phrase and you save something for the parentheses. Whatever goes under or in after the quote or the paraphrase, it might be a page number, but sometimes you don't have a page number and you have to use an article title instead, or excuse me, you'll use the author's name instead in the parentheses. If you don't have an author's name, then you'll use the article title instead. But you want to save something for your parenthetical so that you have a clear beginning. Okay, here's my source. You can really phrase that signal phrase any way you want, but then at the end, you're putting something else to let the reader know that you are done using a source. This is useful in the MLA format and kind of even more important in the MLA format because MLA is very conscious of the idea that you are beginning and ending a source, that is really clear for the reader. So what are some tips for paraphrase, for the summary and the paraphrase, to make sure they are not too much like the original? Because again, that's one of the ways you can plagiarize. So I really recommend in these 7 steps, all they're really saying is don't look at the source while you write the summary, or don't look at the source while you write the paraphrase. Instead, read it once, twice, 3 times, push it to the side, and then you try to put together what you think was most important and what you need and what you thought was valuable that the author was presenting, and then write that out without looking back. What it should do and what it helps me to do, and this is a strategy I use, but it will make the paper sound like it is in your style. And that's one way we catch a summary or paraphrase that is plagiarized, that's way too close to the original, is we read your paper and we're reading it and you've got the quotes and you're setting it and everything looks good. And then suddenly it sounds like someone else has taken over the paper, where you've got this almost like a completely different style kind of hijacks the middle of your paper. That is a giveaway. That is a red flag. That is a why does this sound so much different than every other part of your paper? Okay, so just a few more items here. Actually, I do want to show you an example before I move on to those last 5. So here's an example of an appropriate paraphrase rather than show you one that was not done well. Here is a quote, and then again, this is from the same article that I had previously mentioned. So, instead, the monster's attentiveness to the cottagers allows him to apprehend the rules that govern their social world and to make use of that knowledge to achieve certain ends. During his tenure in the hovel, for example, the creature carefully studies the family's economy of household chores and their reasons for rationing food at mealtime. All right, so here's an appropriate paraphrase. Yet the isolation of the monster does not leave him completely uneducated on social norms of society. In fact, an article from Criticism points out that by observing the DeLacy family, he understands how the food and work of the house are divided up and how the members of the house look after one another. This knowledge the creature gains is valuable because it gives him some insight into humanity, which he requires to accomplish his goal. And again, notice the signal phrase is right here. Now I've got the clear boundary marker. And what's nice about that is it shows the three parts of your paragraph you need. You've got the setup, you've got the evidence provided, and now we have the tie-in. Unfortunately, those goals eventually center on vengeance, and his knowledge of family and love becomes the means in which he tortures Victor. So, again, that would be an acceptable use of a paraphrase. Now, if we were going to do a bad job with this paraphrase, it would probably read something where one of the ways that we'll see this pretty often is where we just have a word, almost just synonyms are put in. So instead of what it reads here, we'll have something like during his time in the house. For example, the creature carefully watches the family's chores and their reasons for dividing food at dinner time. And so all we have is this repetition of the exact same structure, but simply a few words have been taken out, a few words have been replaced, and now you have what really would constitute, even with a citation, would constitute plagiarism. And that's where you want to make sure you're making an effort to avoid, because that will cost you points. All right, just a few things on the presentation here for MLA. Misuse of MLA often leads to plagiarism and inadvertent plagiarism. So here, just a few things that are kind of typical style mistakes. A signal phrase is required in MLA. Make sure you have it anytime you use evidence. Author and page number are typical in the in-text. However, if no author is present, the title is required. It's not optional. Again, I kind of went over this at least a couple of times in the last few minutes, so I'm going to say one more time. Make sure you save something for the boundaries and indicate the beginning and end of cited material, especially when summarizing or paraphrasing. It's obvious with a quote when you've ended, but it's not as obvious with summarizing or paraphrasing. Number 4 here, the information in the in-text should lead directly to a source on the work cited. So what this means is an in-text citation requires the author's name and a page number, right? Again, typically. So what that author's name needs to be the hanging indent. And on a works cited page, MLA lays it out so there's that hanging indent. Everything's double spaced, and you've got that part that kind of sticks out. The part that sticks out should easily match with each in-text citation. And if you go through your paper and you're looking for these different sources and you have these different names that are jutting out. So, okay, here's Miller. And I look over here. There's Miller. There's Smith. Okay, there's Smith. And you see them in order. That's great. You've got everybody accounted for. But if you find an author and you look and their name is not there as the hanging indent, that may be an indication that you have cited something wrong. We've seen instances where people will have things on their works cited page they didn't use. Again, that's a red flag. That's very shady looking. It looks like you padded your works cited page. That will cost you points. MLA wants anything on your works cited page to be something you actually used. But we also have instances where people will cite a source over and over and over again, and we can't figure out where it is on the works cited page, what it is, or if it was even cited at all, because those names are not matching up. Finally, just a reminder about format. It is not a 5-paragraph essay. Make sure that you're giving each of your supporting arguments multiple paragraphs. You don't want to end up with a page long or 2-page long paragraph, because it starts, again, a red flag. It starts to indicate the organization is off, that your ideas are muddled, that things aren't broken up nicely for argumentation purposes, and that does lend into that idea, give into that idea that your sources could also be muddled and confused, and things might not be as clear as they should be. If you have any questions on citations or how to cite something, or if you think of a question based off of anything that I've said here, please feel free to reach out and email me, and I'll be happy to help you with your paper. If there's something you'd like me to look over, or something that is really confusing you, a source you need help with citing, any of those things, just reach out. So best of luck, and I hope to see you soon.